Hello everyone, Ken and Louie here, and it's that time again where I take a look back at this year, 2020, and put out my thoughts on it, looking back on it. So I have a Sword Art Online Fatal Bullet in the background here, except I did turn off the sound this time, so to guarantee that that the game doesn't become too loud, because that happened in one of my earlier videos. So 2020 has been one of the worst years in recent history for most people. And I think pretty much all of us can agree on that. But for me personally, last year was much more difficult for me personally than this year. And that is because of a personal matter for myself, where I had a medical condition come up during that year. So if I didn't have that, then yes, I would probably be on the same boat. So if you want to know a little bit more about that, then you can look up my recollection of last year to know a bit more about that. And I'm going to be focusing much more on the topic at hand rather than the gameplay. So, because I wanted this to be a lot more focused and serious compared to some of my other ramblings. So overall, this year has been, I definitely wouldn't say it was great for me either by any means, but it wasn't nearly as bad as it has been for most people. So last year, for my medical condition, I had a blood clot in one of my legs, and that was extremely painful, and that basically made it so that I could no longer work. So that was the reason why last year was much more influential in my life compared to this year. And honestly, I don't think, even if the world wasn't in the state that it's in, not much I don't think would change on my end, really, because I don't really go outside very often as is. So with the virus going around, it wouldn't really have changed much. But I will say, though, that because of the fear of the virus, it has really drastically changed the atmosphere, for lack of a better word. Like, whenever I go to, like, the grocery store and stuff, and especially since I live in a state that mandates mask wearing, it definitely feels, the only term that I can think of is oppressive, but that probably isn't necessarily correct. And because of that, like, I go out even less than I probably would otherwise. So, speaking of the virus, so for anyone watching this later, when this whole thing passes over, is that in 2020, early 2020, the world endured a virus called COVID-19. And ironically, at the beginning of this year, when this stuff was beginning to roam around, YouTube decided to basically make it so that nobody could even say the word COVID for some reason, because, you know, that's brilliant for people just wanting to spread awareness of it. So good job, YouTube. And also, it kind of went on, YouTube kind of went on a spree of kind of, well, they were taking down videos of people who did studies on the virus, and if it didn't have the same conclusions as like the main people, they labeled it as misinformation. So I mean, you can come to your own conclusions on that. So basically, the information that we were given about how this virus works, and it's basically, from what I understand, just a more aggressive version of the flu. And yeah, some people were saying some things, and then other people were saying others. So if it wasn't, like, if a doctor who did studies on it came to one conclusion and it wasn't the same as like the so-called leaders of health, they were labeled as misinformation and discarded or censored completely, pretty much. And it turned out that there was a certain medication that you could take that actually did do very well in helping with the virus, and yet it was censored anyway. I don't remember the exact name, but it was basically a medication that helped with the normal flu, and since the coronavirus is effectively a form of it, obviously that helps helps a bit. So yeah, for certain things, it was really hard to know, like, what, because of that, whether or not it was just because maybe these people who were censored were actually wrong, or maybe people just didn't like it. It kind of gave the impression that that the people in the government kind of wanted you to think a certain way. And maybe I shouldn't be talking about that first, but I just kind of wanted to briefly mention that. So a lot of things, like a lot of confusion at the beginning of the year, and also our president, if you don't live in the United States, he basically locked down the country at the beginning of this pandemic, to try to slow the spread of it for a number of months for sure, and then basically the states took over whether or not they wanted to continue that, I think basically a month or two afterward. And I live in one of those states that wanted to keep its COVID restrictions, so I'm mostly talking about the word that has a lock in it. I'm not sure if YouTube actually likes saying the full word, you know, gotta, even though that I don't monetize anything. I don't really want to say anything specific to make me stand out either. So, there were that, and then also mask requirements, which, from the sound of it, certain doctors were saying that masks were unhelpful and even counterproductive, and then other people were that medical professionals that said that they were really good. And from what I've seen, or what I've read from Mayo Clinic, which is basically one of the top hospitals in the nation, it basically said masks are primarily helpful for if you have the virus itself, and it helps you stop, like, it helps you not spread the virus to other people if you have it yourself. So if you didn't have it, it made it sound like masks weren't really all that helpful. And for me personally, whenever I wear a mask, I might be wearing it wrong, but I get massive headaches, and that's probably because I am breathing in my carbon dioxide constantly rather than oxygen. So basically for me, I would definitely get sick by wearing a mask long before I actually get the virus itself. So yes, that is fun. I have no idea how everyone has been able to, like, if you have a job that requires it, you have to have some props, because I have no idea how you're able to put up with that. Not get sick from that. Again, I might have just been wearing it wrong this whole time. Especially considering that, again, since I don't go out very often, I don't really think too much about it. But there is that. So COVID has definitely been the biggest thing that the world has been going through this year, that has made it so that people can't really live life normally. And that would mean not going in for work. A lot of stuff is like online only. Movie theaters or any kind of outdoor or out of the house entertainment has been basically been completely taken down, or people just don't want to go, obviously. So the entertainment industry has completely went from mostly leaning towards being at home to completely being at home rather than going to the movie theaters at all. Which, I mean, since people were, the trends were leading towards that way anyway, and since I personally don't really go out very often myself, it makes complete sense to me. So, or I am not surprised by that, I should say. And then tourist areas, obviously, people haven't been traveling because this whole deal. So definitely the world just feels different compared to how it has been for the virus alone. So that has been the biggest thing. It isn't the only thing, because it's 2020, it's an election year in my country, the US. So basically, in addition to the COVID stuff, you have political stuff that is put out there as well. You know, like campaign ads or rally stuff and everything to put out the presidential candidates. Which I don't want to go into, like, how the election went, but basically it's been a mess from start to finish, really. And I'm not really surprised. I was, quite frankly, expecting it to be a mess. So, based on previous information and how people were acting right before the election, so that just adds to the effect of having COVID in addition to that. So that's fun. And then what else? So that's kind of like the major points that I wanted to cover. So basically this year, because of the virus, the pandemic that's been going over the entire world, everyone who was living a normal life in the sense of, you know, you go to work, you drive to work, and then if you need to go to a grocery store or something, or if you wanted to go to a movie theater with friends, or if you wanted to just hang out with friends in general for some quality time at your social gathering place of choice that is out there, this year has really put a damper on that. And honestly, this year basically, it really saddens me in many ways. And it's not because it affects me. It's actually quite the contrary. That, in the sense of, since April of 2019, I've been basically been doing nothing but gaming for the most part since my medical injury, and since I wasn't able to go back to work, and I'm still in the process of figuring that out, sadly. I still am not really certain what I'm going to end up doing. And in theory, that has made it so that I've had much more time to work on YouTube projects, but it just hasn't really turned out that way. So, why I say that it's really sad is that everyone who has had a terrible time because of the pandemic this year has basically had a bit of time in my shoes in the past year. Because me gaming all day, every day, essentially, for the most part, it sounds really fun on the surface. It sounds like a dream come true. But from actually experiencing it, for the most part, it's a nightmare for me. And that is because many times, many instances, when you have entertainment all the time, you lose, or at least I would think that this is what would happen for most people, is that you don't have fun doing what you have found fun. So imagine playing your favorite game, or watching your favorite TV show, or, you know, doing what you love most, and then doing nothing but that will most likely make it so that you do not enjoy that anymore. And that is one of the most painful feelings that I've ever felt. And I was even thinking about doing a dedicated talk video about that specifically at one point. But yeah, doing nothing but entertainment makes it so that sometimes, if you don't have enough distractions to, well, I guess on a chemical level, to make it so that you don't have an overdose of dopamine, in a sense, you basically lose interest in everything that you used to love. And it's, like I said, it is one of the most painful feelings that I've ever felt in my life. And because of this year, I just feel like people who don't have my condition, or I guess to blatantly put my excuse, so to say, of why I'm not doing anything productive, I guess. Because I'm not working, it just feels like because of this virus, everyone else has had time living in my shoes of doing nothing but entertainment throughout this whole time. And also it was something that from the doctor when I went into to see a specialist at Mayo Clinic to find out more about my condition. It sounded like I was unique. Well, it is rather unique, and I guess my body's configuration is definitely unique in how it dealt with my condition. But my condition, while it is extremely rare, I'm not the only one dealing with that. There are other people who have had my condition. And again, it kind of saddened me more so because other people have to deal with what I have to deal with. And that is more often than not more painful to me than dealing with it myself. So yeah, that is pretty much my thoughts on the whole deal of 2020. And that's not even, I haven't even been really talking about really if you've had it or if your family members have had it. My grandma and step-grandpa have gotten it. I think they have recovered now, thankfully. But it's definitely been... I can imagine that if you did lose somebody, you do have my condolences about that. I know I don't exactly have a super well way with words, so hopefully I can get my meaning across here. So with that being said, I just wanted to mention as well, like speaking about the virus itself, for those who don't know, the virus is mostly dangerous towards people who have existing conditions as well as who are elderly. So basically, those who are vulnerable to arguably any disease are the people who are most vulnerable to this disease. So I mean, that's technically not really all that surprising, but it's worth pointing out that it doesn't, like I said, it's pretty much just a more aggressive flu that, I mean, I haven't really looked into too much of the symptoms, but yeah, it definitely just sounds like it's more so just a flu with a little bit of steroids on there. So after I defeat this one, I do want to go into something that may or may not be actually a little bit more important. I searched up the statistics of the United States corona cases. According to Google, that apparently gets its information from the New York Times. And showing a few percentages, because I wanted to bring something up before I end it here. So, let's see what I got. for XP. Five levels, not terrible, but wish it was more. Actually, before I get into statistic numbers, there's one more thing that I wanted to bring up, which was what this channel has done in 2020. So I have done a few projects, including the game that you're seeing being played in the background here, the Sword Art Online Fatal Bullet Let's Play. I finally finished that to a satisfactory degree yesterday. And I did also do Half-Life 2 and Half-Life 2 Episode 1 this year. So that was pretty exciting, though I kind of felt like I could have done a much better job on that one. And definitely last year was more stressful on the YouTube side of things compared to this, because of the whole COPPA situation, and how basically because of that it was kind of threatening all content creators on extremely vague rules that thankfully doesn't really seem to have done anything, or at least on the surface. And so that was kind of a good thing to have that not be a big issue. The other thing is that I finished Resident Evil 1 Remake this year, or last year. Getting my years mixed up already. And Resident Evil 1 Remake was definitely a game that did a lot of things right, but it did a lot of other things that if you're a blind player, it's very tedious for a blind player. And it does a lot of things to kind of screw with you and troll you. Mostly relating to the inventory system. So I still haven't done a review on that game, as well as a lot of other games. I really need to get on doing reviews, but unfortunately I just feel like when I do a review, I definitely want to do a much better job at them, and that requires a lot more work, and I really don't know how to necessarily put my thoughts together in a satisfactory way. So there is that. And then the other thing is that me and Warmonger continued the Path of Exile to level 100. We were at level 93, I think, or 94, something like that. So that was fun to do that with him, as well as the race events, or at least some of the race events that Path of Exile did near the end of the year. That was... Some of them were definitely better than others, but they were pretty much mostly geared towards good players. In all seriousness, if you didn't know what you're doing for a lot of things, you would have a really hard time doing those race events. And a race event, for those unfamiliar, is basically like Path of Exile has its major league update every 3 months, and a race is basically a miniature league that has added mechanics in it, but it only lasts for either a week or a month or something, so it doesn't last the 3 months. So that was definitely something. And then lastly, on the YouTube things, before we get into a little bit more serious topic, was that briefly I did mention in a few of my videos that I have been watching virtual YouTubers, and Hololive EN was part of 2020, so they came out in September, and they're basically YouTubers who use a face cam, but they have a model. They use a model instead of their real life appearance for their entertainment. So hopefully, that's how I would describe it. So hopefully that is enough to give you an idea. And at least for me, it might have been because of the games that they were playing, but I found at least 2 or 3 of them to be very entertaining out of the 5. So I won't say which ones, because, I mean, that's completely subjective, and I don't really want to put one over the other. But there was 2 that were just not my style, and they were also playing games that I either did not know about or wasn't really intrigued by. But they definitely brightened up the year for not only me, but a lot of people, especially during their New Year's stream. A lot of people sounded like that was pretty much the highlight of their year. And it really goes to show that YouTube, I would say for a lot of people, is their escape from the crappy stuff of life. And games are sometimes the same way. Well, actually, a majority of the time probably is the same way. You know, you get done with work or school or whatever. You don't have to deal with all that stuff anymore for the rest of the day. You have your free time. You know, you play a game that you find fun, or, you know, watch YouTube videos that you get entertainment out of. And Hololive EN, well, not only Hololive EN, but just YouTube in general, I guess, has really been people's escape from the state of the world in 2020. I mean, it's not only this year, but especially this year. So, with that being said, like the virtual YouTubers, they grew very quickly, considering when they were released. One of them is nearly 2 million subscribers, and 2 of them, I do believe, have 800,000. And that's within 3 months. So even with the Hololive name brand, that is still exceptional. And sadly, though, when I look at my channel and my content, I just feel like I could have done so much better. I really had no excuse not to do better than I did for my videos this year. And it's mostly down to when I record for a number of hours, and then I don't record for a number of days. So I basically do maybe 5 parts in one day, or 6 parts or whatever, and then I don't record for a number of days, and then I do the same thing. So I don't record consistently, and because of my medical injury, that definitely set me back as well, I think, because it made it so that I did absolutely nothing YouTube creating for at least 6 months or 4 months. Let's just say 4 to 8 months to be broad, because it's been really a blur for me. And when you don't do something consistently enough, obviously, it is really hard to get good at it. So I felt like I could have definitely done much better, considering that arguably for most of this year I shouldn't have had much I shouldn't have had much better to do, if that makes sense. So, but I do hope that my videos have at least made somebody's day. I mean, that's kind of the whole goal of this thing. I mean, I've been doing this for a number of years, and I never really saw myself as getting very big, especially considering that I pretty much do whatever I want. So there really isn't like a consistency in genre or things of that nature. So I'm not really surprised, but at the same time, I just hope that people who do watch my videos, whether they're informative or entertainment focused, that they get something out of my videos. I mean, that's pretty much all I would like to do with this. So lastly, I have somewhat the most serious thing that I want to talk about in this video is statistics. And the reason why I bring this up is because a lot of the damage, so to say, from the coronavirus for 2020 was not necessarily the virus itself. Now, the reason why I say that is because when the president called for basically a lockdown of our country for a number of months before the states took over, was that many people lost their jobs. Because if you were working at a place that was considered non-essential, you were pretty much let go. And I don't really know the state of the country right now in terms of economics this many months later, but I can tell you that the states that do still have really heavy COVID restrictions, because I am using the word restrictions rather than lock, the word law with lock in it. That many people may have not been working throughout this whole time. And from going through it myself, I mean, that is a terrible feeling. I mean, granted, I was forced out of it, out of something out of my control that was directly involved with me, so I didn't even really have much of a chance of attempting to do something else for a long time. But if you were one of those non-essential workers that were working, I guess I don't really know, but if you weren't working at like a food place or whatever, because people gotta eat, then that is a terrible feeling. And all that. And I'm sorry that a lot of people had to go through, again, the same thing that basically I did last year. Or the year before. If you really want to be technical about it. So, the reason why I want to bring up these statistics is because there are still several states that have, like I said, these heavy COVID restrictions that may be keeping people from working or, you know, being able to live life, I guess, to put it simply. So I can't speak for other countries. So if you live in Europe or Canada or Africa, well, anywhere other than the US, I can't speak for your countries. So I can't say what, I mean, I guess I could technically look them up, but I looked up the United States cases and death numbers. So as of right now, supposedly, according to Google, that has been getting information from the New York Times as well as other sources, I guess. So this is what you get from your Google search. So it says the cases have been 20 million and the death amount has been 346,000. And again, if you've lost someone from COVID, I'm sorry. You have my condolences. That losing someone that dear to you is never a easy thing to go through. And I want to bring up the amounts for the top states in the United States. And that would be California, Texas, Florida, New York, and Illinois. California has 2.31 million, so most of these are rounded to the nearest integer, and the death number is 26,000. Which means, out of the cases and deaths percentage, it has a 98.87% survival rate. For Texas, 1.77 million cases, 28.1 thousand deaths, 98.41% survival rate. Florida, 1.32 million, 21.6 thousand deaths, and 98.36% survival rate. New York, being a little bit of an outlier, 979,000 cases, but being the highest death amount of 37.5 thousand, which is a 96.16%, so 2% less than these other states. Illinois is 966,000 with 18,000 deaths, which is 98.14%. So hopefully I've read that off, all of that correctly, and I did my math correctly. So out of these 5 states, California has had the most cases. New York, even with half the cases, has over 10,000 more deaths. But on average, all of them have an over 98% survival rate. And New York, even with the highest death to case percentage, is still a 96.16% survival rate. And as far as I'm aware, New York and California have handled this virus the worst out of all the states. Now that is just the impression that I've been given. Now, I mean, according to the percentages, Texas technically did worse than California, but California has a lot of problems. So overall, when you take the 20 million cases compared to the 346,000 deaths, that is a 98.27% survival rate out of that. So during this year, well, actually the last 4 years, pretty much most of the political channels have been against our president, Donald Trump, about a lot of different things. Now, I wouldn't say that he's definitely not perfect. Okay? I mean, just like anyone, things could have been done better. But for a president that has been ridiculed and smeared for 3 years prior with the so-called Russian interference, okay? And then for this whole year, if you pretty much go to anything political on the mainstream media, all you will hear is the number of deaths in this country. Okay, so they keep bringing up the number of 346,000. I mean, that's terrible. I get it. It is. But here's the thing. Is a virus that has a 98.27% survival rate worth making it so that no one can work unless you work from home or you're an essential worker, with a large number of people not being able to work for themselves, supply themselves, and people not able to live their lives because they're in fear of, again, a virus that has 98% survival rate, if you get the virus in the first place. Okay, so if we take the population of the United States, 331 million, divided by the cases, only 6% of the United States population has had a case for this virus. Okay, let's just say, even with the amount of testing that's going on, let's raise it to 8%, okay? Just for the sake of argument. 8 or 10%, okay? For the accounted deaths, that's only 0.11% of the United States population. So 99.89% survival rate from this. Okay. Now this part, I wanted to be as serious as I could. The reason why I'm bringing this up is because, like I said, is something that you have, if you get the virus in the first place, have a 98% survival rate, unless you live in New York, which, according to the statistics, you still have 96%. Is that worth not being able to supply your family? Not being able to go to school as a kid? Is that worth it? Because I can tell you that untreated malnutrition has a 100% death rate, if not treated. Okay. And also just the depression of this year. Nobody ever talks about the depression numbers. How many people have died from suicides this year? Or drug overdoses? Or other various things because of the state of the world? If this thing wasn't blown up by the media in this country, honestly, we have probably had worse viruses in the past that, quite frankly, I didn't even know about. Like the Ebola virus, nobody ever talked about that. Well, I was in high school then, so it is possible that I just wasn't in tune with anything political. But I hardly even knew that Ebola was considered a pandemic. Or the swine flu. That is something that was hardly ever talked about there as well. So, and as far as I remember, it sounds like those were much worse in terms of survival rate. So, I know that a lot of people will disagree with me, and that's fine. Okay? Everyone can have their own opinion, or at least should be able to. But, like I said, is something that in this country, I can't speak for any other country. I can only speak for my country. But it's something that has nearly a 99.9% survival rate worth destroying the country over. And I think that is where I'll leave it off. So, I do apologize that those statistics you could consider to be politics, and I know most people don't like to talk about politics, and that's understandable. I don't either. I try to do my best on this channel to not get to anything remotely political unless it's something general, like saying, that there's an election, like I have done, and being as baseline as possible. But yeah, I couldn't sit back without mentioning those things. And if you're watching this video, if you're still watching this video, I just wanted to have a few people think about that. So with that being said, though, moving in to 2021, judging by the numbers and putting those numbers into perspective, and how, quite frankly, local governments have handled this situation and how they have acted, unfortunately, I'm not super positive 2021. And I know most people want to be, and don't let me rain on that parade, but judging on what I've seen, if there isn't big changes, I fear that 2021, for at least this country, Americans, and possibly other countries as well, if changes are not made, that 2021 will just be an extension of 2020, where everyone is living in fear of something that they have a 98%, for most people, 98% survival rate from. Or, if you don't include the cases, and you do the overall population, a 99.9% chance of surviving. But I guess for most Americans, we'll find out on either January 6th or when your local government decides to make any changes. In my opinion, just my opinion, whether it's just putting it out there, could be wrong, but in my opinion, for this virus, after learning about it, the lockdown for this country should have lasted the initial 6 weeks up to 12 weeks of being locked down, flattening the curve, and learning about what the virus does, and then opening up again with the current, most state regulations of social distancing and wearing a mask if you want to, if you think it helps you, and then continue living life. But because unfortunately many things need to be political, or will be political, this has lasted, like over 10 months. So that is why, for me, I'm not as optimistic about 2021. I just feel like there is too much writing on the wall for me to be positive, but I want to be proven wrong. I want to be able to live life again without the feeling of depression everywhere you go outside. Everywhere that's public, and not being able to go to the grocery store without wearing a mask and being in fear of this. So with that being said, though, I think 2020, while it is definitely up there as one of my worst years for a lot of different reasons, but I would say for me, it's probably the third worst. My worst being 2012 because of a family situation, and 2019 for a personal medical reason. But 2020 is definitely up there, under those. So with that being said, though, let's try to make 2021 a good year, shall we? And if any of you are interested, if you've stuck with me till the end of this video, because I know it's going to be a long one, but I thought everything that I talked about was important. I will be starting my next project, which, if you like horror games, I'll be playing Alien Isolation in the next few days. I can't say exactly when, depends on what my family wants to do for New Year's. Hopefully you've had a happy New Year's with friends and family. So you can watch me be in terror of an alien, possibly. So there's that, and hopefully all of us can improve at whatever we work towards, whether it's a hobby or work or I guess in some of us cases, entertainment, and being able to entertain others. So yeah, that being said, let's try to prove my pessimism wrong by making 2021 a great year.